Hey guys, this is Paul, and I know this video is pretty late, but I still wanted to share my opinions about the new 2020 iPad Pro, and more importantly, the $300 Magic Keyboard that you can get to go along with it. As a college student, I loved the iPad Pro that I got back in 2018, and I used that for almost my entire freshman year, and it completely revolutionized the way I took notes. And I used that iPad Pro until I decided to give the iPad 7th Gen a try. And I realized with that switch that I didn't really use all of the Pro features enough to justify its price point, so I decided to downgrade to the iPad 7th Gen, which I've been using until this new iPad 2020 was just announced a couple months ago. Now, to me, the new iPad Pro's main appeal is its compatibility with the new Magic Keyboard. And this, of course, has the backlit keys and, more importantly, a touchpad that finally gives the iPad Pro cursor support. This is something we've been waiting for a long time on the iPad, so I'm really glad to see that Apple's not only made it available for this year's iPad Pro 2020, but also for the 2018 iPad Pro if you connect a Bluetooth mouse to it. So props to Apple for their backwards compatibility there. So if you're wondering about my opinions about the iPad Pro, you can really just go and watch the video I made last year, because this year, it's really not that different. They've basically upgraded the RAM and the processor a little bit and added a wide-angle camera and a LiDAR scanner, and that's about it. But if you haven't seen that video that I made last year, to sum it up, I'm a big fan. The form factor is sleek and modern yet functional. The 120Hz display is beautiful. The magnetic Apple Pencil support is great, and the stereo speakers are the best on any tablet out there. Basically, there are few, if any, complaints I have with the new iPad Pro, and the new additions like the wide-angle camera and the added RAM are certainly welcome, but they're not really worth talking about too much. What is worth talking about, at least briefly, is the new LiDAR scanner that you can see on the back there right next to the cameras. And this is a pretty cool addition that I had some fun messing around with. Basically, if you aren't familiar with it, a LiDAR scanner will fire pulse lasers and use their reflections to create a 3D depth map of your environment. This technology is used on a lot of autonomous vehicles to sense their surroundings, but what does that mean for iPad? Well, as for now, it's just kind of a cool trick to show off to your friends using some AR demos, but I know there are some very cool possibilities with this sort of technology. Some things that come to mind might be 3D modeling and, of course, its contribution to AR gaming. But again, as for now, it's something I'll probably never use. And now let's get to what everybody's been wanting to know about, the $300 or even $350 if you get the 13-inch model Magic Keyboard. Now for that price point, I would be expecting the absolute best that Apple has to offer, and thankfully it is a pretty impressive piece of hardware. The first thing I noticed is just the weight of it. The iPad alone weighs about 465 grams, and the case weighs in at just over 600 grams. So when using the case, you'll be over doubling the weight of the iPad. It's got that same matte sort of rubberized finish that the other Smartfolio cases have had, which I'm fine with, but my biggest complaint comes from the hinge mechanism on the case. You've probably seen the advertising tagline by now that Apple's been using. It floats, and yeah, I guess that's kind of cool. The iPad is attached with some super strong magnets that allow it to stay suspended maybe a couple centimeters above the keyboard, but is it functional? But before we get into that, I want to briefly tell you guys about the sponsor of today's video, Paperlike. Paperlike is a screen protector that's available for most recent iPads. I used one on my iPad 7th Gen and just got one for my new iPad Pro, and they basically mimic the feeling of writing on paper on your iPad. Here's a quick sound comparison for writing with the Paperlike off and the Paperlike on. As you might have heard, it adds a lot of texture to the screen, which makes writing with the Apple Pencil so much more enjoyable. The matte finish will also help minimize glare and fingerprints, and the application process is super simple. Check the link in the description if you're interested. So the hinge is able to go from a little less than 90 degrees to maybe 120 degrees, which covers most but not all viewing angles. For example, if you're standing and typing at a desk, it might not bend enough, which is a little annoying. But a more significant issue is that it no longer allows the keyboard to be folded behind the iPad so that you can use the iPad in portrait mode. This is huge for all those people who take notes with their Apple Pencil because you'll have to completely remove the iPad to have it lay flat on the table for note taking. It basically makes the iPad a landscape-only device because there's pretty much no scenario that you could comfortably use it in portrait mode unless you remove it, of course. That being said, thankfully the Hinge is robust enough to be able to draw with the Apple Pencil while it's mounted in the case, but I would have much preferred the option to be able to just flip the keyboard to the back like we could do on the old Smart Folio cases. Moving on to the keyboard itself, the keys use Apple's scissor mechanism, so they have a small amount of travel and they're relatively quiet, but they still have that satisfying clickiness to them. They feel really good. And the keyboard is also backlit, which is great. However, one thing I feel that's missing from the keyboard is function keys. It would be great to be able to control the iPad's brightness or volume, or pause or skip songs on Spotify straight from the keyboard, but you just can't do that, which you can do on pretty much any laptop out there. However, there are a number of shortcuts you can use in various applications, and to see those, you can just hold Command on the keyboard, which is nice and convenient, and that works with any Bluetooth keyboard, so it isn't just exclusive to the Magic Case. And then there's the touchpad, which is decently sized, and this is what was really interesting to me because before using this year's iPad, there was never cursor support on iPad OS. So I was really curious to see how they would implement that, and they've taken a very clean and well integrated approach using just a simple dot as the cursor. And when you hover over something that's clickable, the cursor basically snaps to that box or button. And of course, this snapping only works in compatible applications. For example, it works in Pages, but not in Google Docs. And compatibility is really my biggest issue with the trackpad at the moment, because not being able to perform simple tasks like clicking and highlighting text in apps like Notability and Docs is a little bit annoying for me. But hopefully this will only get better with time as more apps begin to have cursor support. I should mention that the cursor support will work with any Bluetooth mouse that you connect to the iPad, but if you use the Magic Keyboard with the trackpad or Apple's actual Magic Trackpad, that will give you access to a bunch of really useful gestures. For example, you can swipe up with 3 fingers to go home, you can swipe left or right with 3 fingers to go to previously used apps, and you can swipe up and over to access multitasking. These all feel really natural and intuitive and do a lot in making the iPad feel more like a laptop than it ever has before. So yeah, the Magic Keyboard case is really nice, but is it worth $300? And for me, the answer is a definite no. Taking handwritten notes is what I use my iPad for probably 75% of the time. So if I would have to remove my iPad from its case every time I wanted to do that, I would probably rather just have the old Folio case that would allow me to just fold it around to the back so I could lay it down and write on flat surfaces. And yeah, that would be sacrificing the trackpad with the cursor support, but for the way I use my iPad, it would be worth it. So if you think you would get a ton of use out of the keyboard and trackpad, maybe you're writing long essays all the time and would really benefit from that, then it might be worth the $300. But that is a really hefty price to pay for a keyboard and trackpad, so I'm kind of hesitant to recommend it to anybody unless you really think you'd be using it all the time. And for the iPad Pro itself, I think my opinion remains unchanged. If you want the best tablet out there, then this is the one to go with. But if you already have the old Pro, this year's model is definitely not worth upgrading for. Anyways, if you like this video, a thumbs up is always appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.